The old pickup truck kicked up dust as it rolled down the dirt road, miles away from anything that looked like civilization. Behind the wheel sat a man in his late 50s, his face weathered by sun and time, eyes hidden behind worn sunglasses. He'd made this drive 1,000 times before, coming back from the feed store in town with supplies that would last him another month. His name was Daniel, and for the past 12 years he'd called this remote corner of Montana home. 40 acres of grassland, a small barn, a handful of cattle, and a farmhouse that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was his. More importantly, it was quiet, peaceful, far from the noise that used to fill his head. The townspeople knew him, sort of. He was the guy who showed up once a month, paid in cash, loaded his truck, and left without much conversation. The cashier at the feed store had tried making small talk for years before finally giving up. Some folks just preferred being alone, she figured. She wasn't wrong, but she didn't know the whole story. Daniel pulled up to his house just as the sun started dipping below the horizon. November in Montana meant early sunsets and bone-chilling cold. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. This was his favorite time of day. No sounds except the wind moving through the grass and his 2 dogs barking their usual greeting from the yard. He climbed out, his joints reminding him he wasn't 20 anymore. The dogs, a pair of mixed breeds he'd rescued from the shelter years back, rushed over with their tails wagging. He scratched behind their ears and headed for the barn to check on the cattle before bringing in his supplies. Most people would find this life boring. Wake up early, tend to animals, fix whatever broke yesterday, eat simple meals, and go to bed when the sun went down. But for Daniel, boring was exactly what he needed. Boring meant safe. Boring meant he could almost forget the things he'd done in another life. He'd been a Marine once. Not just any Marine, but a scout sniper. 2 tours overseas, more missions than he could count, and a service record that was mostly classified. He was good at his job. Too good, maybe. When you spend years looking at the world through a scope, it does something to you. The military gave him medals. They called him a hero. But when he came home, he couldn't sleep without seeing faces. Couldn't handle crowds. Loud noises made him drop to the ground looking for cover that wasn't there. The doctors had a name for it, gave him pills that didn't help much, and suggested therapy. So he'd bought this farm with his savings, as far from other people as he could manage. Out here, there were no backfiring cars that sounded like gunfire. No crowds pressing in, just land, animals, and silence. He finished with the barn and hauled the feed bags inside. The place was simple. Kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and a basement workshop. No TV, just a radio and some old books. He fixed himself dinner and ate at the kitchen table, the dogs lying at his feet. Once a month, he had a video call with his therapist. She was patient with him, never pushed too hard, but she kept suggesting he should try connecting with people again. Stop hiding from the world, but she didn't understand. He wasn't hiding. He was protecting himself. Because sometimes when things got too loud or too crowded, he felt that old training kick in. The part of him that assessed threats and calculated responses. Someone dangerous. Out here, alone. He didn't have to worry about that. As darkness settled over the farm, Daniel sat in his living room with a cup of coffee, reading by lamplight. The dogs had been acting strange all evening, though. They kept pacing to the windows, ears up, letting out low growls. He'd checked outside twice already and seen nothing. Probably just coyotes or a bear passing through. It happened sometimes. He told himself that's all it was, but something in his gut said different. Old instincts don't die easy, and his were telling him to stay alert. He checked the doors, made sure they were locked, and kept the lights on a bit longer than usual. What Daniel didn't know was that 30 miles away, a group of men were having a very bad night. They'd crossed some dangerous people in Idaho, a deal gone wrong that left them scrambling for a place to hide. 6 of them crammed into 3 vehicles, armed and desperate, looking at maps for somewhere remote, somewhere they could lay low for a few days until things cooled down. Their leader, a man who'd made too many bad decisions in his 38 years, pointed to a spot on the map, a farmhouse miles from town surrounded by empty land. Satellite images showed 1 vehicle, no neighbors for miles. Perfect. And whoever lived there would be easy to handle. They'd take over the place, stay quiet for a week, then move on. They had no idea who they were about to meet. 2 miles from Daniel's farm, the 3 vehicles pulled off the main road and killed their lights. The men got out, checked their weapons, and studied the distant farmhouse through binoculars. One light in the living room, no movement they could see. They waited another hour, watching for patterns, making sure the occupant was alone. Daniel finally headed to bed around 11, the dogs settling in their usual spots by the door. He changed into old sweatpants and a t-shirt but didn't fully relax. That feeling in his gut hadn't gone away. He kept his boots nearby within easy reach. Old habits. Before getting into bed, he walked through the house one more time, checked each window, tested the back door, stood in the darkness of his kitchen just listening. The dogs watched him with curious eyes, probably wondering why their owner was acting different tonight. In the basement workshop, hidden behind a false wall panel he'd installed years ago, sat a long gun case. Inside was a rifle he'd maintained religiously despite never planning to use it again. Every 6 months he'd take it out, clean it, check the scope, and put it back. He told himself it was just routine, but deep down, some part of him knew that a man with his background couldn't afford to get rusty. Tonight, for the first time in 12 years, he thought seriously about taking it out. His hand actually touched the panel before he stopped himself. This was paranoia talking. Not everything was a danger. Sometimes dogs just barked at wildlife. He went back upstairs and climbed into bed. The house went dark except for a small nightlight in the hallway. Daniel lay there, eyes open, listening. The wind, the old house settling. The dogs breathing. He focused on his breathing exercises, trying to calm a nervous system that had been wired for combat. After 20 minutes, his eyes finally started to feel heavy. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was nothing. The dogs had quieted down. Everything seemed fine. Sleep was just starting to take him when he heard it, a sound so faint most people would have missed it. Metal on metal. A tool working on something. His eyes snapped open. This was the difference between a trained operator and a civilian. No panic, just instant clarity. He looked at his watch. 11:47. Slowly, silently, he moved to the window. His bedroom faced the barn and he kept a pair of night vision binoculars in the drawer. Another thing he'd told himself was just precaution. He raised them to his eyes and scanned his property. At first, nothing. Then movement by the barn. A figure, definitely human, working on the barn door. Then another figure. Then a third. His trained eye caught more movement near his truck. Daniel's mind shifted into a mode he hadn't accessed in over a decade. The fear disappeared. In its place came cold calculation. He counted the figures. 6 that he could see. Watched their movements. They had weapons, he could tell by their postures, but they moved like amateurs. Bunched up. No proper spacing. No one watching their backs. They were dangerous, yes, but they weren't professionals. That gave him options, but somewhere in the darkness 6 men were moving closer. They'd made their plan, divided up responsibilities, and were confident this would be easy. Just an old man living alone. They'd be inside within minutes, in control of the situation. They couldn't have been more wrong. The quiet Montana night was about to become very interesting. Daniel moved away from the window and pulled on his boots. His hands were steady, muscle memory taking over. He'd trained for situations like this thousands of times, though he'd hoped never to use that training again. But hoping doesn't stop armed men from breaking into your home. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand. No signal. They must have cut the lines or used a jammer. Smart but not smart enough. He had a backup plan, like he had backup plans for everything. Years of military discipline had taught him that preparation meant survival. The dogs were getting restless, sensing the danger outside. He led them quietly down to the basement into a small storage room with thick walls. They didn't want to go, but they trusted him. He gave them each a treat and closed the door. Better they stayed safe down here than became targets or distractions. Back upstairs, Daniel moved through his house in complete darkness. He didn't need lights. He knew every floorboard, every piece of furniture, every corner. This was his territory, and that gave him the advantage. The intruders might have weapons and numbers, but they were walking into his world. He could hear them now, getting closer to the house. Boots crunching on gravel. Low voices trying to stay quiet but not quiet enough. They were splitting up, probably planning to surround the place. Standard amateur tactics. They'd try the doors first, maybe a window, then force their way in. Daniel had maybe 3 minutes before they reached the house. He used those minutes wisely. First, he went to the basement workshop. The false panel slid open silently, well-oiled hinges making no sound. Inside sat his rifle case, cleaning kit, and other equipment he'd maintained over the years. He pulled out the rifle, checked it automatically, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he grabbed his old tactical vest with the radio equipment and night vision scope. His therapist would probably have a lot to say about this moment, about how easily he slipped back into operator mode. But right now, staying alive mattered more than therapy sessions. The basement had another feature most people didn't know about. When Daniel bought this place, he'd spent months modifying it. Part of his PTSD management, his therapist thought. A way to feel safe. She had no idea how literally he'd taken that advice. Behind a shelf of canned goods was a door, carefully hidden and soundproofed. It led to a tunnel he'd dug himself, reinforced with concrete and wood. It came up about 200 yards away in his workshop, a separate building he'd built when he first moved here. The tunnel had cost him 2 years of back-breaking work, but now it might save his life. Daniel crawled through, pulling the shelf back into place behind him. Even if they searched the basement, they'd never find it. The tunnel was narrow, barely enough room to crawl, but he moved through it quickly. Years might have passed, but his body remembered how to move in tight spaces. He emerged in the workshop, breathing hard but focused. This building had no electricity running to it from the house, just solar panels he'd installed on the roof. Independent power. Independent water from a well. He'd told people he used it for projects, which was true. He just never mentioned it could also serve as a survival bunker. Through the workshop window, he watched his house. The men were there now, 6 of them like he'd counted. They moved around the building, checking windows, trying doors. One of them kicked at the front door, testing it. Another was messing with the back entrance. Daniel set up his position. He had a clear view of his property from here, elevated slightly on a small hill. He attached the night vision scope to his rifle and settled into a comfortable shooting position. Not to kill, that's what he kept telling himself. Just to control the situation until help arrived, but he needed to call for help first. The workshop had what he needed. A ham radio setup, completely independent of phone lines or cell towers. He'd kept his license active, sometimes checking in with other operators late at night when he couldn't sleep. Now it might save his life. He powered up the radio and switched to the emergency frequency. His voice was calm, professional as he reported armed intruders at his location. The sheriff's dispatcher recognized his call sign. Help was coming, but it would take at least 40 minutes, maybe longer. 40 minutes was a long time when 6 armed men were breaking into your home. Daniel heard the crash of his front door being kicked in. He watched through the scope as they rushed inside, weapons ready, spreading through his house like they owned it, tearing through his things, looking for him, probably looking for valuables too. One of them, the leader from the way the others deferred to him, was barking orders, telling his guys to search every room, check every closet. They thought they had an easy target. An old man living alone, probably scared, probably hiding under a bed somewhere. They had no idea that old man was watching them from 200 yards away with a rifle scope. Daniel controlled his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, staying calm. The training never left you, even after 12 years. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger. Not yet, maybe not at all if he was lucky. The men ransacked his house. He watched them throw his furniture around, smash his dishes, dump out drawers. Looking for him, looking for money, looking for anything valuable. One of them found his old Marine Corps photo on the wall and showed it to the others. They laughed. An old military photo didn't scare them. It should have. The leader pulled out a phone, making a call. Daniel couldn't hear what he was saying, but the body language told him enough. They were planning to stay. This wasn't just a robbery. They wanted to use his place as a hideout. Probably running from something, needed somewhere remote to lay low. That changed things. If they'd just wanted to rob him and leave, he could have stayed hidden, let them take what they wanted. Material things didn't matter. But if they were planning to camp out here, that was different. This was his home, his sanctuary, the only place he felt safe. One of the men walked out onto the porch looking around at the property. He lit a cigarette, relaxed now that they'd secured the house. He called to the others that the old man must have run away, probably heard them coming and took off across the fields. They'd find him in the morning. Daniel watched this through his scope. The crosshairs centered on a point 10 feet to the man's left. He'd never aimed at a human being outside of combat, and he wasn't going to start now if he could help it. But he needed to send a message. He calculated the wind, the distance, the angle, all automatic. his brain doing math he'd done 10,000 times before. Then he took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked across the quiet Montana night. The bullet struck exactly where Daniel aimed it, hitting the porch pillar inches from the man's head. Wood exploded in a shower of splinters. The man dropped his cigarette and hit the deck, screaming for the others. Chaos erupted. Men poured out of the house, weapons up, looking for the shooter. They fired randomly into the darkness, wasting ammunition, hitting nothing. Daniel watched from his position, calm and still. They couldn't see him. The workshop was dark, his muzzle flash minimal, and they had no idea where the shot came from. The leader was yelling at his men to get back inside, to find cover. They scrambled back into Daniel's house, no longer relaxed, no longer confident. They'd just learned a hard lesson. The old man hadn't run away. He was out there in the dark. And he was armed. Daniel chambered another round and settled back into position. The night was just beginning, and he had 35 minutes until the sheriff arrived. 35 minutes to keep these men contained, scared, and away from his dogs in the basement. He'd done harder things in his life, but not for a very long time. Through the scope, he watched them arguing inside his house, pointing in different directions, clearly disagreeing about what to do next. Some wanted to leave immediately. Smart ones. Others wanted to go after him, hunt him down. Stupid ones. The leader seemed torn between both options. Daniel could see the fear creeping into their movements now. They'd come here expecting an easy victim. Instead, they'd walked into something they didn't understand. And the worst part for them? The night had only just begun. Daniel waited. Patience was something the military had drilled into him. A good sniper could wait for hours, days even, for the perfect moment. These guys couldn't wait 5 minutes without panicking. Through his scope, he watched them huddle inside his living room, trying to figure out their next move. One of them kept peeking out the window, then ducking back down. Another was pacing, waving his gun around while he yelled at the others. Fear made people stupid, and these men were getting stupider by the minute. The leader finally made a decision. He sent 2 of his guys out the back door, probably trying to flank Daniel's position. They moved low and fast, using his truck for cover. Not bad tactics for amateurs, but they made one critical mistake. They assumed Daniel was still in the same spot where he'd fired from. He wasn't. Daniel had already moved. First rule of sniping, shoot and relocate. He was now on the opposite side of the workshop with a clear view of the back of his house. He watched the 2 men creep around, checking behind buildings, scanning the darkness with flashlights. Flashlights. In a tactical situation, against someone with night vision. Daniel almost felt bad for them. Almost. He picked up a rock and threw it hard toward the barn about 50 yards from his position. It clattered against the metal siding, loud in the quiet night. Both men spun toward the sound, raising their weapons, flashlights cutting through the dark. Daniel fired. Not at them, at the ground between them. Dirt exploded upward and both men dove for cover, scrambling behind a water trough. They were yelling now, scared, calling for backup. One of them was saying something about a sniper, his voice high and panicked. Good. Let them be scared. Scared people made mistakes. The leader appeared at the back door, shouting at the 2 men to get back inside. They didn't need to be told twice. They ran, stumbling over each other in their rush to reach safety. Daniel let them go. His goal wasn't to hurt anyone. It was to keep them contained until the sheriff arrived. He checked his watch. 28 minutes until help showed up. Might as well be 28 hours. Inside the house, things were falling apart for the intruders. Daniel could see them through the windows, arguing, pointing fingers, blaming each other. The leader was trying to maintain control, but fear was winning. One of the younger guys looked ready to cry. Then something changed. The leader pulled out his phone again, making another call. His body language shifted. He wasn't panicking anymore. He was planning something. That made Daniel nervous. Desperate plans were dangerous plans. 2 of the men went to the kitchen. Daniel watched through his scope as they started grabbing supplies from his pantry, his refrigerator. They were filling bags like they were preparing for something. Then they grabbed bottles from under his sink. Cleaning supplies, alcohol, things that could burn. Daniel's stomach dropped. They were going to try to smoke him out. Or worse, they were going to burn his property to create chaos and cover their escape. He couldn't let that happen. This farm was all he had. More than that, his dogs were in the basement. If they set fire to the house, those animals would die, and Daniel would never forgive himself. Time to change tactics. Daniel moved again, this time to a position closer to the house. There was a small shed about 75 yards from his back porch, used for storing tools. He made it there in under a minute, moving quietly through the darkness. His knees complained about the low crawl, reminding him again that he wasn't 20 anymore, but adrenaline pushed him through. From this new position, he could see into the kitchen clearly. 3 men were there now, mixing something in a bottle. Daniel took a breath. He didn't want to escalate, didn't want to hurt anyone, but he couldn't let them destroy everything he'd built here. He needed to stop them, and he needed to do it now. He aimed carefully, not at the men, but at the bottle they were filling. It was a difficult shot. Small target, low light, through a window. But Daniel had made harder shots under worse conditions. He steadied his breathing, found his calm center, and squeezed the trigger. The bottle exploded in the man's hands. Glass and liquid went everywhere. The men screamed, diving away from the counter, thinking they were under direct fire. The leader was shouting orders that nobody was following. Pure chaos. Daniel smiled grimly. Message sent. I can hit whatever I want, whenever I want. Your move, but they didn't get the message. Or maybe they did and just didn't care anymore. The leader grabbed one of his men and shoved him toward the front door, pointing outside, clearly ordering him to make a run for their vehicles. Maybe they were finally going to leave. The young guy at the door looked terrified. He didn't want to go out there. Didn't want to face whoever was in the darkness. But the leader had a gun pointed at him now, giving him a choice between maybe getting shot outside or definitely getting shot inside. The kid chose maybe. He burst through the front door, running full speed toward the vehicles parked down the driveway. Daniel tracked him through the scope, leading the target, finger resting on the trigger. He could end this right now, one shot. But that wasn't who he wanted to be anymore. Instead, he fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Each one struck the ground in front of the running man, creating a perfect line that he had to jump over. The message was clear. I'm letting you run. I could stop you, but I'm choosing not to. The young guy made it to the vehicles, fumbling with keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. Finally, he got one of the trucks started and peeled out, spraying gravel, fishtailing down the dirt road. 1 down, 5 to go. Inside the house, the remaining men were watching their escape route disappear into the night. Daniel could see the calculation on the leader's face. Should they try to follow? Should they stay and fight? Should they surrender? Then the leader did something unexpected. He walked to Daniel's front window and held up his hands, showing he wasn't armed. He was talking, his mouth moving, clearly saying something. Daniel couldn't hear him from this distance, but he could read the situation. The man wanted to negotiate. Daniel considered his options. He could ignore it, keep them pinned down until the sheriff arrived. But negotiations meant talking, and talking meant revealing his position. On the other hand, if he could talk them into surrendering, this could end without anyone getting hurt. His radio crackled. The dispatcher checking in, confirming the sheriff was en route 22 minutes out. Daniel acknowledged and made his decision. He activated a speaker system he'd installed in the workshop, something he used to play music while working. His voice boomed across the property, amplified and echoing, impossible to pinpoint. You've got 2 choices, Daniel said, his voice calm and steady. Leave now and I let you go. Stay, and you wait for the sheriff. Either way, nobody has to get hurt tonight. The leader was looking around frantically, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. He shouted back, we just need a place to stay for a few days. We're not trying to hurt anybody. You broke into my home, Daniel replied. You terrorized me. You tried to burn my property. That ship has sailed. We've got hostages. The leader shouted, playing his last card. Daniel's blood went cold. What hostages? Your dogs. We found them in the basement. You try anything and they're dead. For the first time that night, Daniel felt real fear. Not for himself, but for those 2 innocent animals who trusted him. He'd put them in the basement to keep them safe, and now they were bargaining chips. The leader must have seen he'd struck a nerve because he pressed his advantage. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let us leave, all of us. And once we're clear, we'll tell you where the dogs are. Daniel's jaw clenched. The calculation was simple and brutal. If he waited for the sheriff, these men might hurt his dogs out of spite. If he let them go, they might hurt the dogs anyway. But there was a third option. One he'd been trying to avoid all night. Time to stop playing defense. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, each one calculating risks and outcomes. He'd spent 12 years trying to leave behind the cold, tactical thinking that war had taught him. But tonight that thinking might be the only thing that saved his dogs. "You've got 5 minutes to decide," the leader shouted from the window. "Then we start making noise down in that basement." Daniel knew what he was really saying. They'd hurt the dogs if he didn't comply. These weren't just criminals anymore. They were desperate, cornered, and that made them unpredictable. But they'd also made a critical error. They assumed Daniel cared more about his dogs than about catching them. They were right about the first part. Dead wrong about thinking it was an either-or situation. "Okay," Daniel said through the speaker, his voice resigned. "You win. Take the vehicles and go. Just don't hurt them." He could see the leader smile, thinking he'd broken the old man. "Smart choice. We're leaving now. You stay wherever you are for 30 minutes. Don't follow and your dogs live." "Got it," Daniel replied, letting his voice sound tired, beaten. The men gathered quickly, grabbing their weapons and bags. 4 of them headed for the front door while the leader stayed back, watching. Daniel watched them through his scope. As soon as they cleared the porch, he moved. Not away from the house, but toward it. He went through the tunnel again, faster this time. He emerged in his basement, listening. Above him, he could hear footsteps. The leader, still in the house, probably covering the others' escape. Daniel moved silently to the storage room where his dogs were. They whined softly when they heard him, tails thumping against the floor. Both were fine, unhurt, just scared. Relief flooded through him. He couldn't take them out yet. Not while there was still danger upstairs. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the gun safe in the corner of his basement, the one he'd installed but hoped never to use. Inside was a handgun loaded and ready. He'd kept it for home defense just in case, but this was his first time actually needing it. Daniel checked the weapon automatically, years of training making his hands move without conscious thought. Then he moved to the basement stairs, listening to the movement above. The leader was walking around, checking rooms, making sure Daniel wasn't hiding somewhere in the house. The floor creaked above his head. Daniel tracked the sound, knowing his own house better than any blueprint. The leader was in the kitchen now, looking out the window. Daniel climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step, avoiding the ones he knew made noise. At the top, he eased the door open a crack. He could see into the kitchen. The leader had his back turned, phone to his ear. "Yeah, we're clear," the man was saying. "Old fool bought it. Get the trucks ready." This was Daniel's chance. He could wait for the man to leave, let them drive away. The sheriff would track them down eventually, but something stopped him. These men had violated his home, threatened his animals, tried to burn everything he'd built. If he let them go now, what was to stop them from doing it to someone else? Daniel stepped into the kitchen, weapon raised. "Hang up the phone." The leader spun around, eyes wide, fumbling for the gun in his waistband. But Daniel was faster, his weapon now pointed directly at the man's center mass. "Don't. Just don't. Keep your hands where I can see them." The man froze, phone still in one hand, other hand halfway to his gun. He was calculating, Daniel could see it, wondering if he was fast enough. He wasn't, not even close. "On the ground," Daniel ordered. "Face down, hands behind your head." "You said you'd let us go," the man protested, but he was lowering himself to the floor, recognizing the authority in Daniel's voice. The voice of someone who'd done this before, someone who wouldn't hesitate if pushed. "I lied," Daniel said simply. Funny how that works. Outside, the other men had reached the vehicles. Daniel could hear engines starting. He grabbed the leader's phone and spoke into it. "Your boss is in custody. You can drive away, but I have your faces on camera. I know your license plates. The cops will find you, or you can stay, surrender peacefully, and maybe things go easier." There was silence, then swearing, then engines shutting off. One by one, the men got out of the vehicles, hands up, defeated. Daniel kept his weapon on the leader while using the phone to call 911, updating them on the situation. The dispatcher confirmed the sheriff was now 15 minutes out. "You're making a mistake," the leader said from the floor. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Daniel replied. "Small-time criminals who picked the wrong house." The front door opened slowly. The other 3 men filed in, hands on their heads. Daniel directed them to sit against the wall. They complied without resistance. The fight had gone out of them. "How did you get back in the house?" one of them asked. "We saw you outside. Heard your voice from the speakers." Daniel didn't answer. "Let them wonder. Let them spend their time in jail trying to figure out how one old man had outsmarted all of them. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Daniel stood watching his prisoners. His mind was already processing what had happened, what he'd done. He'd used his training again, the skills he'd tried to forget, and it had felt natural, easy. That worried him. Red and blue lights finally appeared in the distance. The sheriff's department plus state police backup. Daniel carefully set his weapon on the counter, hands visible. The sheriff entered first, weapon drawn, 3 deputies behind him. He swept the room, saw Daniel standing calmly by the counter and the 5 men sitting against the wall, then lowered his gun. "Daniel," the sheriff said, recognizing him. They'd met a few times in town over the years. "You okay?" "I'm fine. They're unarmed. I have their weapons secured in the basement except for this one." He gestured to the handgun on the counter. "That's mine, legal and registered." The deputies moved in, cuffing the intruders one by one, reading them their rights. The leader was glaring at Daniel, but there was something else in his eyes too. Respect maybe, or just resignation that he'd lost this round. The sheriff walked over to Daniel, studying his face. "We got your call about armed intruders. Dispatcher said it sounded like you had things under control. Didn't expect to find all of them gift-wrapped for us. I just wanted them contained until you arrived," Daniel said. "Nobody got hurt. That's what matters. Security cameras caught everything?" the sheriff asked, gesturing to the cameras Daniel had mentioned. Daniel nodded, not mentioning that the cameras were mostly for show, old units that barely worked. The bluff had been enough. As the prisoners were led out to the waiting patrol cars, one of the deputies started taking Daniel's statement. He kept it simple. "Armed men broke in. He called for help. He defended his property." No need to mention the tunnel or the tactical positioning or the way his training had kicked in like it was yesterday. The sheriff returned after securing the prisoners. "News crews will probably show up tomorrow. This kind of thing doesn't happen much around here. You sure you're okay?" Daniel thought about that. Was he okay? He'd faced armed intruders, used skills he'd tried to bury, made decisions that could have gone very differently. His hands weren't shaking. His heart rate was normal. No panic attack, no flashback, just clarity. Maybe that was progress. Or maybe it was something else entirely. "I'm okay," he finally answered. "Just want my house back to normal. We'll need to process the scene, collect evidence. Might take a few hours. You have somewhere to stay tonight?" Daniel shook his head. "I'll wait in my workshop. Just need to check on my dogs first." He went down to the basement, opened the storage room, and both dogs rushed out, jumping on him, tails wagging frantically. They were fine. Everything was fine. He sat on the floor and let them lick his face, their simple joy washing away the tension of the night. Above him, police radios crackled and boots walked across his floor. His home had been violated, his sanctuary compromised. But he'd protected it. Protected himself. Protected what mattered. And somehow, for the first time in 12 years, Daniel felt like maybe he could handle whatever came next. The sun was coming up by the time the last police car left Daniel's property. Yellow crime scene tape still fluttered around his porch and evidence markers dotted his yard. His home looked like a war zone. Daniel sat on the steps of his workshop, coffee in hand, watching the morning light spread across his land. The dogs were curled up at his feet, finally calm. They'd been checked by a vet, given treats by deputies, and were now content to just be close to their owner. The sheriff had stayed behind. His name was Tom, maybe 10 years younger than Daniel, with a weathered face from a lifetime outdoors. He sat down beside Daniel without asking. "Hell of a night," Tom said. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Tom spoke again. "You know this is going to be all over the news by noon, right? Local hero stops home invasion, that kind of thing." Daniel grimaced. "I was afraid of that. Reporter from the county paper already called me 3 times. You might want to think about what you're going to say." "I'm going to say no comment and close my door," Daniel replied. Tom smiled. "Fair enough. But you should know what you did last night was impressive. That's not just training, that's skill." "I got lucky," Daniel said. "They were amateurs. Amateurs with guns are still dangerous. You kept your head, made smart choices, and nobody got hurt." Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't sure how he felt about what had happened. Part of him was relieved. Part of him was shaken by how easily he'd slipped back into that tactical mindset, and part of him had felt alive last night in a way he hadn't felt in years. "The DA is going to want a statement from you," Tom continued, "and you'll probably have to testify. These guys are looking at serious time. Plus, they were wanted in Idaho for drug trafficking. You caught some genuine bad guys." "Good," Daniel said simply. Tom stood up. "Get some rest. I'll have a deputy check on you later. And Daniel, you did good last night." After Tom left, Daniel sat there for another hour just thinking. His mind kept replaying the night, wondering if he could have done things differently. The answer was always yes, but those other ways might have ended with someone getting hurt. The path he'd chosen had worked. Everyone was alive. That had to count for something. Around 9 in the morning, his phone started ringing. First his therapist, who'd heard about the incident. Then a cousin he hadn't talked to in years. Then reporters, until he finally just turned the phone off. He spent the morning cleaning up his house. The police had left the mess for him to handle. Broken dishes, overturned furniture, mud tracked everywhere. He worked slowly, finding something therapeutic in putting his space back in order. By noon, the house was mostly clean. The front door needed repairs. Some things were broken beyond fixing, but the house was still standing. Still his, still home. The first news van showed up around 1. Daniel watched from his window, saw the reporter and cameraman looking around. He didn't answer when they knocked. 2 more came later, and he ignored them too. His neighbor from 5 miles down stopped by that evening. Old guy named Bill who ran cattle nearby. They'd waved over the years but never talked much. "Saw the commotion last night," Bill said. "Wanted to make sure you were all right. My wife made you dinner." Daniel accepted the covered dish, surprised. "Thanks. That's kind. Can't believe those idiots picked your place," Bill continued. "Everyone around here knows you were military. We figured you could handle yourself. When I saw all those cop cars, I told my wife, bet Daniel's got them boys tied up nice." And I was right. Daniel hadn't realized people knew about him. He'd thought he was anonymous out here. "Anyway," Bill said, "if you need anything, let me know. Us country folks look out for each other." After Bill left, Daniel found himself smiling. Maybe he wasn't as isolated as he'd thought. Maybe community didn't have to mean crowds and noise. The next few days were a blur of police interviews and repair work. The story hit the news like Tom predicted. A few national outlets picked it up, but they lost interest when they couldn't interview him. Daniel's phone kept ringing with calls from people wanting to hear the story firsthand, or offering him book deals or asking him to speak at events. He ignored them all. This wasn't a story to him. It was just a bad night that happened to turn out okay. His therapist insisted on an emergency video session. She spent an hour asking him how he was processing everything, if he was having nightmares, if the experience had triggered any PTSD symptoms. The surprising thing was it hadn't. If anything, he felt calmer than he had in months, I think. He told her slowly, trying to put his feelings into words. "I think I've been afraid for a long time that if I ever had to use my training again, I'd lose control. That I'd become that person I was in the war and I wouldn't be able to come back from it." "And what did you learn?" she asked. "That I can still do what I was trained to do without losing who I am. I made good choices. I protected what mattered without becoming something I'm not. Does that make sense?" She smiled. "Perfect sense. That's real growth, Daniel. You faced a crisis and stayed true to your values. You should be proud of that." 2 weeks later, the repairs were finished, the news vans were gone, and life was slowly returning to normal. Daniel went back to his routine, feeding animals, fixing fences, living quietly. But something had changed. He didn't feel as isolated anymore. He waved back when Bill drove past. He made small talk at the feed store. He even accepted an invitation to a community barbecue, though he only stayed an hour. The trial date came through for the men who'd invaded his home. They'd all taken plea deals, facing years in prison. The leader got 15 years. The others got less, depending on their involvement. Daniel didn't feel particularly triumphant about it, just relieved it was over. One afternoon, about a month after everything happened, Daniel was working in his barn when a car pulled up. A young man got out, maybe 23 or 24, looking nervous. It took Daniel a moment to recognize him. The kid who'd run away first that night, the one he'd let escape. "I know I shouldn't be here," the young man said quickly, hands up in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to say something." Daniel waited, hand near his phone, ready to call the sheriff if needed. That night, the kid continued, "You could have shot me when I was running. You had me dead to rights and you let me go. I've been thinking about that every day since. About why you'd do that." "You weren't a threat," Daniel said simply. "The cops caught me 2 days later. I'm out on bail now, probably going to do time, but I wanted to thank you for not killing me when you had the chance, for showing mercy when I didn't deserve it. It made me think about the choices I've been making, the life I've been living." The young man got back in his car and left without waiting for a response. Daniel stood there processing what had just happened. He'd thought about that moment too, the decision to let the kid run. At the time, it was just tactics. Now he realized it might have been something more. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch with his dogs, watching another sunset paint his land in gold and orange. His home was his again. His peace was restored, and somehow, despite everything, he felt more connected to the world than he had in years. He was still the same man who wanted quiet and solitude, but now he knew that needing peace didn't mean hiding from life. It just meant choosing carefully what you let into your world. And if trouble came knocking again, well, he'd proven he could handle that too.